Barista pays a veteran's tab in silence. Dawn brings choppers, and her manager. The small coastal town of Seabrook was unusually quiet that morning, the kind of silence that holds its breath before something sacred arrives. Clara moved quickly, her brown boots splashing gently through the puddles left behind by the night's rain. Her scarf whipped lightly in the breeze, and the familiar scent of brewing coffee teased her nose as she turned the final corner toward the cafe. She barely had time to process the stillness before a low, ground-shaking rumble broke it. It was not thunder. It was heavier, deeper, intentional. Metal against pavement. A tank, a real military tank, rolled down Main Street like it had come from a memory or a dream, too vivid to be explained. The kind of sight that did not belong in small-town mornings. Clara froze. All around her, people poured out of bakeries and hardware stores, stepping onto sidewalks with wide eyes and hushed exclamations. Cars idled crookedly at curbs, windows rolled down, passengers leaning out in disbelief. Cell phones were raised. Someone whispered, "Is this a drill? Someone else? Did something happen overseas?" But Clara didn't say a word. Her eyes were locked on the hatch, slowly creaking open atop the tank. A figure rose from it, and her breath stopped. He stood tall, silhouetted against the overcast sky. His uniform was regulation, but worn with travel and dust, and his posture had not changed. Shoulders squared, purposeful. The name on his chest said it all. Reed. She hadn't said it aloud in weeks, but her soul said it now. Ethan. He climbed down slowly, boots meeting pavement with a soft, echoing thud. As he walked, the murmurs around them faded. There was no music, no crowd noise, just the rhythm of his approach and the weight of what he carried in his eyes. He stopped directly in front of her. No words, no fanfare, just him. Slowly, with careful hands, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. From it, he pulled a single folded square of paper, worn at the edges, smoothed by days of being touched. He held it out to her. Clara took it with trembling fingers, her eyes never leaving his. She unfolded it with the same care he'd used to carry it. One line. "I couldn't hear your voice that day, but I felt everything you said." The world tilted, and her knees nearly gave way. She looked up at him. He raised one hand, palm open, finger spread, then moved in a soft, fluid motion. "Thank you." She recognized the sign immediately. Basic ASL. But there was nothing basic about the way he did it. Nothing casual about the way he looked at her, like she had been the only voice he had heard in months of silence. She couldn't respond, not with words. Her throat was too tight, her heart too loud. So she nodded just once and smiled, lips trembling. Then, without sound, without warning, he reached behind him and pulled out something else. A sunflower, slightly wilted at the edges, touched by cold but vibrant, bright, brave. He held it out to her with both hands like an offering. She took it gently, fingertips brushing his. Neither moved. Neither needed to. And then, as quietly as he had come, he turned, walked back to the tank, climbed up, paused just once to look back. Then the hatch closed, and the engine rumbled to life. The tank rolled down Main Street, turning the heads of everyone it passed, but none more than Clara, who stood frozen in place, holding a single flower in one hand and a note in the other. Around her, the world returned to motion. Children tugged at their parents' coats. Teenagers showed each other video footage on their phones. A shopkeeper wiped his eyes with a napkin, but Clara stayed still, because in her chest, something enormous had just moved. In Chasteau, she had known from the first time he slid that napkin across the table at her cafe. She had known he wasn't like everyone else, and now he had told her, without needing a microphone or a speech, or even his voice, he had told her that she mattered, that her kindness had not vanished into silence. That love didn't always arrive with flowers in hand or music playing in the background. Sometimes it arrived on a tank. Sometimes it came with a note and a sunflower. And sometimes, when you least expected it, it came back to you whole. 3 weeks earlier, the cafe hummed softly in the early evening light. Outside, the rain had just started tapping gently against the windows, painting the glass with quiet streaks. The smell of fresh chili and cornbread filled the air, clinging to warm sweaters and worn boots. Clara moved through the tables with practiced grace, her apron tied loosely at her waist, her hair pulled into a low, messy braid. It had been a long shift, but nothing unusual until the bell above the door jingled, and she looked up to see him, a man in his late 20s maybe, in military green. His boots were soaked, his jacket buttoned to the top, cap tucked low. He walked in slowly, like the world outside had taken too much from him, and found a booth in the farthest corner, back against the wall. Clara gave it a minute before approaching. When she did, she smiled politely and began her usual, "Evening, can I—" But he gently raised a hand and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. She blinked, hesitating. The paper read, "I'm deaf. I prefer to write if that's okay." Clara's smile softened. She nodded and pulled a pen from behind her ear, scribbling a quick line on her own notepad. "Absolutely okay. Take your time. Let me know what you'd like." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Phew." The first flicker of something warm, he wrote carefully, then passed the note back. "Grilled cheese and tomato soup, please, if that's still a thing." She scribbled again. "It's always a thing." "Good choice." She turned to walk away, but not before catching a glance, one she couldn't quite name. Then it was not sadness exactly, not fear, not detachment. It was cautious hope. 15 minutes later, she brought the food, setting it down gently in front of him. He nodded once in thanks. She didn't linger, just smiled again, and walked back to the counter. The rest of her shift went on. Tables came and went, regulars chatted. Every now and then, she glanced toward the back booth. He ate slowly, as if tasting more than just food, like he was trying to remember how warmth felt. But it was when he reached for his wallet that something shifted. He froze. Clara watched from behind the counter as he checked both his pockets, then opened the wallet again and stared at it, jaw tense. She could almost feel his breath hitch, the way his hand stilled over the worn leather. He stood up halfway, looking toward her, embarrassment in every line of his body. She walked over quietly before he could gesture or write anything. She reached over, took the bill, and tore it in half. He stared at her, stunned. Clara smiled gently. "Dinner's on me," she said softly, though she knew he might not hear. Still, her voice was steady. "Kind," she pointed to her chest. "My choice." He didn't argue, didn't pretend. He just nodded slowly, deeply. Then he pulled a pen from his jacket and scribbled something on the corner of a napkin. He handed it to her with both hands. "Thank you for not asking why, just for understanding." She took it like it was something sacred. After he left, she folded the napkin and tucked it into her apron. When she got home that night, she opened her journal and carefully taped the napkin onto a blank page. No date, no title, just that one sentence. Toot. She stared at it longer than she meant to, because there was something in those words that wrapped around her chest in a way she did not expect. Something that felt like being seen, something that felt familiar. She did not know his name. She did not know where he had come from. But something told her that wouldn't be the last time she saw him, and somehow that made her feel a little less alone. The nights were getting colder each evening as the sky deepened into navy, and the lamps buzzed to life along Main Street. Ethan returned always at the same time, always to the same booth. He never spoke, never stayed long. He ordered with a slip of paper, ate slowly, left a quiet note sometimes, and disappeared before the dinner crowd arrived. Clara had grown used to his rhythm. She had started to look forward to it, even if their exchanges never strayed far from the basics. "Tomato soup again?" She'd write. "Comfort food," he'd reply. "Anything sweet tonight?" "Your handwriting's enough." They didn't need much. The silences between them weren't awkward. They were steady, warm, like the quiet between old friends or something waiting to bloom. One night, the cafe closed later than usual. A burst pipe had kept her busy mopping the back kitchen for nearly an hour after the last customer left. By the time she finally turned the lock and stepped outside, the streets were almost empty, slick with drizzle and painted an orange streetlight. Duh. She turned toward the alley shortcut she always took. Behind the buildings, familiar, safe. But that night, it was different. She heard the footsteps behind her just as she passed the first dumpster. Quick, close. Then a hand yanked her shoulder. She barely saw the man, just a flash of a hood, a sneer, a hand snatching at her bag. She screamed, but it came out strangled, choked by fear. She fought back, struggled, kicked, but he was stronger. He shoved her against the wall. Her head hit the brick, dazing her. She blinked, gasping, eyes searching for help that wasn't there. Ogi. Until it was. A shadow moved fast, a shape out of nowhere. Ethan. He moved without hesitation, military instincts sharp as steel. One hard strike sent the attacker reeling. Another disarmed him. Within seconds, the man was on the ground, groaning, scrambling to run. Ethan let him go. Clara slumped to the pavement, shaking, her palms scraped, knees torn. Her breath came fast and shallow. Ethan knelt in front of her, reaching a steady hand toward her face, but not touching, waiting. She looked at him. His eyes weren't angry, not frantic. They were full of light, alert, focused. She realized then he had not heard her scream. He hadn't needed to. She had looked just for a split second over her shoulder as she fought, her eyes pleading into the night. And somehow Ethan had seen her. He pulled a notepad from his coat, hands quick and familiar, then turned it toward her. I didn't hear you, but I saw you, and I'll always see you. Clara covered her mouth with her hand, tears spilling hot and silent, not just from fear, but from the safety that came after it, the kind that came from someone who chose to stay. Ethan helped her up, slow and gentle. He didn't lead, didn't rush. He just walked beside her all the way back to the cafe. They didn't speak, not with words, but she never felt more heard. That night, long after, she sat in her small apartment, the events of the evening replaying in her mind, the fear, the struggle, and then the sudden, unexpected rescue. Ethan's presence had been a silent guardian, a protector who had seen her in her moment of need. She looked at the napkin, now carefully preserved in her journal, and felt a warmth spread through her. It was more than gratitude. It was a connection, unspoken, but deeply felt. Clara bandaged her knees and washed the blood from her palms. She sat in bed and reread the note Ethan had given her. She didn't tape it into her journal like the others. She folded it carefully and slid it into her wallet, keeping it with her. Because for the first time, she understood something she hadn't before. His world was not silent. It was watchful, intentional, honest. And she didn't want to just witness it from the outside anymore. She wanted to step inside, to learn his language, to understand his kind of listening. And so, before she turned off the light, Clara pulled up her laptop. She typed into the search bar, ASL classes near me. The first night she signed to him, her hands trembled. Not from fear, not from doubt, but from something deeper, like standing on the edge of a new language, a new beginning. Her fingers felt clumsy, uncertain, but her heart was steady. This moment mattered. Gesult. It had taken her 2 weeks of late-night practice, hours after her shifts ended. Clara would sit on the worn-out couch in her tiny apartment, eyes squinting at grainy videos of ASL instructors, signing the same phrases over and over. She mimicked them in the reflection of her toaster, the microwave door, even the window when the city lights outside weren't too harsh. She signed to her cat, finger-spelled her grocery lists, wrote down phrases in her journal, underlining the ones she hoped would make him smile. Neche. She didn't want to just nod at him anymore. She didn't want to always hand him napkins and hope he could read the kindness in her eyes. She wanted to speak to him in his language. That night, the cafe was dim and quiet. The chairs had thinned out, the dinner crowd gone. The music had stopped playing hours ago, leaving behind the soft buzz of the old ceiling light and the hum of the espresso machine as the only soundtrack. At exactly 8:03 p.m., as always, Ethan walked in. Clara saw him through the glass before the bell above the door even chimed. His boots were slightly wet from the drizzle outside, his cap tucked into his coat, his posture straight as ever, unmistakable. He took his usual spot by the window, set down a folded slip of paper on the table, and waited. Clara approached slowly, drying her hands on the towel she'd tucked into her apron. Her heart thudded, not loud, but deep, purposeful. He glanced up and gestured toward the note as usual, but she didn't reach for it. She stood in front of him, her shoulders soft, her breath steady. And then she signed, "Good evening, Ethan." His eyes widened just slightly, a pause not of discomfort, but of disbelief. His brow furrowed, then relaxed. A beat passed, and then he smiled. Not the half-smile he always wore, not the polite dip of the mouth. This was real, wide, like a door had just opened, like sunlight through heavy clouds. He pulled out his notepad, hesitated, then slowly wrote, "You learned this." Clara nodded, then signed again, slower this time. "I wanted to talk to you in your world." His pen stopped mid-sentence, his fingers paused. He looked at her, not like he was studying her, but like he was trying to memorize this moment. He wrote again. No one's ever done that. He looked away for a moment, then back at her, and wrote something longer. "I used to talk a lot in the military. Orders, jokes, radios. Then the blast happened. After that, everything was quiet, including me." He tapped the paper once, lightly. "I didn't lose my voice, just the reason to use it." Clara sat down across from him, her fingers tracing the wood grain of the table, grounding herself. She didn't speak, didn't write. She raised her hands again. "It's okay if you don't want to speak. I'm learning to listen differently." He blinked once, then again. His eyes shimmered, but the tears didn't fall. Slowly, he set down the notepad, closed it, and for the first time, he lifted his own hands. Not with perfection, not with polish, but with intention. "Thank you for meeting me here." Clara smiled, unaware her eyes had begun to glisten. That night, they didn't need menus or notepads or Wi-Fi. They just sat in that booth under the soft light, speaking with their hands and hearts. Ethan showed her how to sign coffee and home and storm. Clara taught him hope and safe and stay. Their fingers danced slowly, like two people learning how to waltz through quiet. No one interrupted. No one needed to. In that corner of the cafe, in a language without sound, they told each other everything that mattered. And for the first time since Ethan had come home, silence did not feel like something missing. It felt full. It felt like love. Evenings at the cafe no longer ended when the lights dimmed and the chairs were flipped. For Clara and Ethan, it was when the real part began, when the chatter faded, when the coffee pots cooled, and the air turned still. Then came their hour, a time without music, without rush, just them. Ethan would take his usual booth. Clara would bring over 2 mugs of tea. No need to ask how he liked it anymore. They had fallen into a rhythm, a language born of patience and eye contact, and the quiet confidence of hands that had learned to speak. At first, their conversations were light. "How was your day? Did the soup taste different tonight?" That couple at table 3 tipped with a crayon drawing again. But soon, the walls that neither of them had realized were still standing began to drop piece by piece. One evening, Ethan signed slowly, almost cautiously, "I have not told this to anyone. Not really, not even my family." Clara paused, set down her tea, and gave him her full attention. "When I came home after I lost my hearing, I thought I could get used to the silence. But it wasn't the absence of sound that hurt. It was the absence of being heard. People stopped talking to me like I was still me. They spoke at me, not to me." He hesitated before continuing. "I started to feel like I only existed when I was useful, in uniform. Outside of that, I was background noise, the irony, I guess." Clara's fingers moved gently in response. "You were never background. Not here. Not to me. Ethan's eyes softened. Then one night, as the rain tapped against the windows and lightning flickered in the distance, Clara asked something she'd been holding back. Do you ever miss talking? He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Yes, but more than that, I miss being talked to. He leaned back, staring out the window. I had this idea once, just a dream, that maybe there could be a place for people like me. Not a clinic, not therapy, just a quiet space where silence is normal, where no one pries you for not speaking. Clara tilted her head, then stood up, walked across the cafe, and pointed to the back right corner, a little nook near the bookshelf, half hidden behind a planter. What about right there? Ethan raised his brows. She smiled, then signed. We call it the silent booth. We make it a space for communication without sound, for connection without pressure. He looked at her, processing, then let out a slow breath, and for the first time, he truly smiled with his whole face. They stayed up late that night, sketching ideas, notepads, sign cards, conversation prompts for beginners, maybe even a journal where people could leave silent messages for others. Clara promised to paint the sign herself. As she gathered the mugs and wiped down the table, Ethan stayed seated, scribbling something on a napkin. Before he left, he slid it across to her. I never thought anyone would want to hear me until you. Clara stood still as he walked to the door. She read the note again, lips pressed together, heart open and full. Then she folded the napkin and tucked it carefully between the pages of her journal. This one she would keep near her heart. And that weekend, they hung a small wooden sign in the back corner window of the cafe. Silent booth. A place to be heard without speaking. Every day after that, someone sat there. Sometimes it was Ethan, drawing in his sketchbook. Sometimes a mother and her deaf son, laughing through their hands. Sometimes just Clara, sipping coffee, waiting. But always, that corner was alive with presence, with meaning, with a love growing louder in every beautiful, wordless way. The invitation came folded neatly inside an envelope marked with a golden seal, Department of Veterans Affairs Community Recognition Ceremony. Clara found it tucked under the sugar jar one morning. Ethan had left it there with just one handwritten note beside it. They want me to speak. I said no. When she asked why, his answer was immediate, signed not written. Because when I speak, I do not sound like them, and I do not want their pity. Clara had looked at him quietly for a moment before signing back. But maybe they do not want to hear your voice. Maybe they want to hear your heart. He didn't reply that night, but he didn't throw the invitation away either. The ceremony took place on a Sunday in the town's old community hall, with arched wooden beams and a flag on every wall. Veterans in crisp uniforms filled the room, medals polished, boots shining. There were families, reporters, children. Clara stood beside Ethan in the lobby before it started, adjusting the sleeve of his jacket, smoothing the edge of her dress. He looked calm, but she knew better. Ready? She signed. He hesitated, then nodded once. Inside, the master of ceremonies called his name, Sergeant Ethan Reed, honored today for acts of bravery, sacrifice, and leadership under fire. Applause rose in waves. Clara walked up with him. She carried no notes, just a small sign clipped to her chest that read, Interpreter. When they stood behind the podium, Ethan did not take the mic. He simply looked out over the crowd, then turned toward her. She took a breath and raised her hands. Then he began to sign, and she matched him, voice calm and steady, following the rhythm of his hands. Thank you for this honor. I never expected to be here, not because I do not value what it means, but because for a long time, I did not believe I belonged in rooms like this. I lost more than my hearing overseas. I lost connection, I lost conversation, and for a while, I thought I lost myself. He paused, his hands still, his eyes scanning the faces in the audience. But then someone saw me, not as broken, not as silent, but as whole, just quieter. He turned slightly, looking at Clara. She reminded me that silence can be powerful, that a heart can speak even when a voice cannot. And today, I speak for every person who has ever felt unheard, not because they could not speak, but because no one stopped to listen. The room was silent for a moment, too long. Then hands began to rise, palms open, fingers fluttering, applause the ASL kind. Dozens, then hundreds, a field of quiet stars blooming across the room. Clara looked out and saw tears on the cheeks of a mother in the third row, a veteran gripping the hand of his son, a teacher signing "thank you" from the back. After the ceremony, as people mingled and music began to play, Clara stepped aside to grab water. When Clara returned, she saw Ethan crouched down in front of a little boy, no more than 7. The boy was wearing a tiny camouflage jacket and had a hearing aid clipped behind one ear. He was signing furiously with tiny hands. Clara approached slowly, just in time to see the boy finish. "I want to be like you because you do not need to talk, but everyone listens to you anyway." Ethan looked at the child, eyes shining. He signed back, "You already are like me. You're enough and just as you are." Then the boy threw his arms around Ethan's neck, and in that moment, Ethan didn't need a stage. He had already said everything that needed saying with his hands, with his presence, with his heart. The last time Ethan stepped through the gates of the base, it was quiet. Not the kind of quiet he had learned to live with, the absence of orders, the silence of battlefields, or the weight of unspoken grief. This quiet was different. It was final. It echoed with memory, with all the beginnings and endings that had happened behind those gates. It wasn't mournful, but it held a kind of gravity only known to those who had given everything, and now were taking something back. He had completed the last round of paperwork with steady hands, turned in his gear's helmet, his tags, his rank insignia. Each item handed over was like closing a chapter that had once defined him. He shook hands with men who had followed his orders, some who had carried him when he could not walk alone, men who once looked to him for commands and later learned how to understand his silent language. His discharge papers were stamped, initialed, finalized. Officially, he was free. But standing there, watching the flag ripple above the concrete parade ground, Ethan felt something unresolved twist inside him. It wasn't regret nor fear. It was the echo of unfinished purpose, a tether he hadn't yet cut, a direction he hadn't yet taken. Special occasion?" a logistics officer asked, glancing over the last form Ethan handed in. Ethan nodded. The officer raised a brow. "Requesting transport? What will it be? A jeep or maybe something low-key?" Ethan gave a faint smile, then pointed to the corner of the motor pool, to the thing that made the mechanic whistle softly under his breath. Ethan didn't need to speak. "You serious?" the officer asked, eyes wide. Ethan nodded again. The next morning, just after 9, the ground began to rumble. At first, people thought it was an earthquake. Then came the roar, the kind of sound that turned heads and slowed footsteps, a deep, grinding growl that rolled through Main Street like a thunder down a canyon. A tank, a full-sized olive-green armored tank, rolling down the center of town like something out of a film, steady, controlled, unstoppable. Storefronts emptied. Baristas and barbers stepped onto sidewalks. Children pointed, jaws slack. Traffic stalled, drivers blinked, unsure if they should salute or panic. Phones lifted, pictures snapped. Nobody knew what was happening, but nobody looked away. Clara had just stepped out of the cafe, locking the door behind her, when she heard the first vibrations. The sound struck something inside her before her mind even caught up. She turned toward the street and froze. She knew that silhouette rising from the tank's hatch, that posture, that quiet strength. Ethan. The tank slowed as it reached the cafe and came to a full stop, air hissing from its vents, engine humming like a sleeping beast. The hatch opened fully, and Ethan stepped down slowly, boots hitting the ground with deliberate weight. His uniform was clean pressed, his face calm, eyes bright with something she couldn't name, something unshakable. He walked toward her, He did not raise a notepad, did not fingerspell or gesture for her to wait. He simply pulled from inside his coat a single folded piece of paper. He handed it to her with both hands. Clara unfolded it. "This is the first order I've ever given myself. Go back, find her." She looked up at him, her lips parted, but no words came. Then his hands moved, slow, smooth. "I chose the tank not to make a scene, but because I needed the loudest, biggest thing I could find to say what I've never been able to say out loud. Thank you." Clara didn't cry, not right away. Instead, she stepped forward, her hands steady, her eyes clear. She signed, "You didn't need a tank. You had me already." Then she closed the space between them and wrapped her arms around him, held him like the anchor she had become. And softly, so softly, she wasn't sure the words even mattered, she whispered near his chest, "I've been waiting for you to come home." And finally, he had, not from war, but from silence. The cafe glowed like a lantern in the snow. Soft, golden lights curled around the windows, strung across the beams like quiet stars. Outside, snow had begun to fall in slow, careful flakes, blanketing the street like a prayer whispered to the earth. The world beyond was hushed, but inside, the silence was deliberate. Every table was full, friends, couples, children with wide eyes, older folks who smiled gently at unfamiliar signs, but not a single voice rose. That was the rule. It was a silent night, the first official event Clara and Ethan had hosted together at the cafe since opening the silent booth. A night not just for the deaf community, but for anyone willing to listen in new ways. Cards on the tables showed simple ASL phrases. Volunteers wore small pins that said, "I'm learning." No music, just soft vibrations through the floors, the warmth of candlelight, and conversations spoken in hands and glances and breath. In the back corner, the silent booth was dressed differently tonight. A white cloth draped over the table, 2 mugs of cider steaming softly, a single candle flickered between them. Above the booth, the sign still hung in its usual place, where silence is not empty, but full. Clara was by the register, helping a little girl sign, "It's nice to meet you," to her grandfather, when she felt a light touch on her shoulder. She turned. Ethan stood behind her. He looked calm, but his hands trembled slightly. He signed slowly with care, "Come with me." She nodded without question. He took her hand and led her through the quiet room. As they passed the tables, heads turned gently towards them, not in interruption, but in quiet attention, sensing something was unfolding. They reached the silent booth. He pulled out her chair. She sat. He sat across from her. For a moment, they said nothing. The candlelight flickered between them, casting golden shadows across the table. Then Ethan reached forward, gently taking her hand in both of his. He signed, "I need to say something, not with these." He lifted their joined hands slightly, but with this. He touched his chest, then his throat. Clara's heart stilled. She knew what he meant. She could see it in his eyes. He signed again, "If you want to hear my voice, please let this be the first time. Let it be for you." Tears filled her eyes instantly. She nodded and waited. Ethan inhaled deeply, his shoulders lifted, his jaw clenched, his lips parted, and for a moment, only breath came. Then, "Clara." The word was rough, uneven, but real. His voice cracked like the first thaw of winter ice, fragile but filled with life. Her hand flew to her mouth. She had never heard his voice before. He continued slowly, each word deliberate, as though relearning how to breathe and speak all at once. "I forgot how to use my voice, but you made me want to learn again." His eyes never left hers. They did not need to. Everything was here between them. "I'm speaking because of you." Then, still holding her hand, he moved knee to floor. One hand stayed wrapped in hers. The other reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. He opened it. Inside was a simple silver ring, thin and engraved with a single word inside the band. "Heard." Ethan looked up at her and whispered almost soundless, "Will you marry me?" The cafe held its breath. Every eye, every hand, every heart leaned forward into that stillness. Clara didn't cry, not at first. She looked at him, at the man who had walked through fire and silence, at the boy who had lost his voice, at the soldier who had turned back on a tank just to say thank you. She looked at the man who had said more in quiet than most did in lifetimes, and then she lifted her hands. "Yes, I've always heard you, even when you said nothing." He let out a breath, a soft, shaky laugh, a lifetime of walls falling in a single exhale. She rose and pulled him to his feet, and this time, when she wrapped her arms around him, she didn't let go. The cafe erupted, not in cheers, but in applause, the way only they knew how. Hundreds of hands fluttered in the air like falling petals, the language of joy, the sound of love made visible. Snow kept falling outside, but in the silent booth, something had bloomed, not from noise, but from a promise that even in the quietest places you are never alone. Sometimes the most powerful voices are not the ones that speak loudest, but the ones that dare to reach across silence. Clara did not need words to understand Ethan, and Ethan did not need sound to show her his heart. In a world that often moves too fast to listen, their story reminds us that love does not need volume. It only needs presence, courage, and a heart willing to stay. If this story touched you, warmed you, or simply reminded you that connection can be found in the quietest corners, please share it with someone who needs to believe in love again. And do not forget to subscribe to Timeline Stories, where we bring you tales of healing, hope, and humanity. Stories that do not just entertain but stay with you long after the last word, because sometimes silence speaks the loudest. Thank you for watching. Stay kind, stay listening, and stay with us. Tea out.